All right, Brian, why don't you introduce yourself and tell me, how did you get involved with moringa?
My name is Brian Holmes, and several years ago, almost 10 years ago, I met a scientist named Dr. Harold Foster. And he had done extensive research on HIV and other illnesses and had created a formula to actually slow the progression from HIV to AIDS. In about 2009, just a few months before he died, he had discovered a plant named Moringa oleifera and had discovered that the nutritional, medicinal properties of this plant met, in fact, exceeded the nutritional formula that he had created for patients living with HIV throughout Africa. And that gave me the idea that if I were to take moringa and add selenium, as per his instructions, that it would have a great benefit in improving the quality of life for people living with HIV.
Okay, and how has that formula been received by the medical community in Uganda?
The formula that we put together for moringa and selenium as an immune booster has been received incredibly well by Ugandans. It's sold in every major hospital throughout Uganda, the pharmacies, a lot of church organizations that care for people living with HIV and other diseases have embraced the formula, and it's been used very successfully and seen great results.
Great. So there's been clinical trials that have been done. Can you explain that process? What was it like to try and get this into hospitals? Because I know that herbal medicines aren't traditionally. I mean, have there been any herbal medicines in the hospitals here before?
Actually, the formula using moringa and selenium is one of the very first herbal supplements to ever be used in hospitals. There's other herbal supplements that are sold in the local market, but don't have any level of credibility or scientific validity behind them. So when we put together this formula, and we were able to show that in 2006, Mango Hospital had done a clinical trial using selenium and other key micronutrients. In 2009, Harvard had started a double-blind clinical trial throughout several countries where they proved scientifically that selenium and other micronutrients could slow the progression to AIDS. Rwanda just recently, just in 2015, published a double-blind multi-site clinical trial where they also proved that even selenium in itself can slow the progression to HIV. So using all that clinical data, which we had started back in 2005, we've been able to show the science community that there is valid research to demonstrate that micronutrients, that your food can very well be your medicine.
Going a little bit deeper into the science of it, would you like to just briefly explain how exactly is the moringa and selenium formula slowing the progression of HIV in patients?
Okay. So Moringa oleifera is one of the most nutritious plants in the world. It has the highest ORAC score. It contains more antioxidants than any food in the world. It contains almost all the amino acids, 25 vitamins and minerals, 46 antioxidants, and it grows like a weed. It grows in dry, arid climates like sub-Saharan Africa. The only thing that moringa is really missing is selenium, and that's primarily because in this part of the world the soils are selenium deficient. So what we do is we add a organic yeast-based selenium, the best selenium in the world, that is actually also FDA approved. We add that with the moringa. Together they combine to help the body generate an enzyme called glutathione peroxidase. Glutathione peroxidase is one of the body's first lines of defense. So whenever we get sick or we catch a virus, the body tries to produce glutathione peroxidase. But if the body doesn't have access to key minerals and nutrients, amino acids, then the body can't produce glutathione peroxidase. And glutathione peroxidase is what's called a selenotype enzyme. It needs selenium in order for the body to produce it. And again, as I was referring to earlier, this part of the world, sub-Saharan Africa, the soils are largely selenium deficient.
Sure. What do you see the future of this plant being in terms of the marketing of it, and also the uptake on a global scale? Like, do you see this going beyond East Africa, and how do you see that progressing?
Mm. We look at moringa as being the beginning, a focal point, if you will, in the sense that there are three interacting crises within Africa: poverty, disease, and degradation of the environment. So our soils are being eroded because we're learning to farm the same way that North Americans and Europeans farm, which causes massive soil erosion and nutrient depletion of the soils. People are cutting down the forests. All these things combined paint a very sad picture for the environment within Africa. We also know that there's massive unemployment, underemployment. People, even if people are making money here, they're subsistence farmers. And then we have lots of issues with malnutrition and disease. So when we look at health, disease, and the environment and poverty together, really the ability to grow moringa and pay farmers an ethical wage so that they can move out of poverty, that's one thing we can help them do, because we need the raw materials for the medicines. We can make the medicines affordable because we're doing value addition, meaning we're taking those raw materials and making finished products, which the local population can benefit from. Most of the time, the history of Africa has largely been foreigners coming in, exploiting the raw materials, and exporting them back to their home countries, where then they make products and create what's called value addition.
So what is the future of moringa as a crop in Africa, as far as you see it?
Well, we kind of call it the moringa factor, in the sense that moringa has the opportunity to open the door for many, many possibilities. If you look at moringa being one of the most nutritious plants in the world, one of the easiest plants to grow in the world, we look at it as growing moringa as a medicinal food, a medicinal herb, if you will, enables us to address three interacting crises: poverty, health, and soil remineralization. So we can actually address health, wealth, and the environment at the same time, if you will. So by paying farmers an ethical wage, not subsistence farming, but an ethical wage to grow moringa in a controlled, regulated environment so that we can produce the world's best moringa, we can then manufacture the moringa that we mix with the selenium into a very powerful immune booster, which we then can sell to hospitals, governments, and really open the door, pave the way, if you will, for other medicinal herbs to act as complementary medicine, if you will. So we're looking at it's a combination of traditional and complementary medicines, which we actually believe people in the African continent are more open-minded to. Largely in the Western world, we've become indoctrinated with pharmaceuticals, but we also know that there's a very big interest in using medicinal herbs here in Africa. So we look at if we can fix the soils by doing proper farming, using effective means of farming such as permaculture design, growing nutritious plants, paying those farmers ethical wages, and then creating jobs locally. It really is a perfect combination.
In the history of Uganda, the moringa crop was originally introduced, and there was a lot of hype, and then there was a big bust around the crop. What do you think makes this platform different? What's going to be different this time around?
Well, one of the keys to our success is taking a multi-sectoral approach, in the sense that we're involving entrepreneurial, ethical business leaders who come from a position of integrity, but also high ingenuity and creativity. So if you can bring into the same room or the same land, if you will, business leaders, researchers, doctors, scientists, and farmers, then you really create you're asking the right questions. And if you're asking the right questions, you're coming up with the right answers. So the business community needs to understand, how do we create a market? How do we execute that market? How do we facilitate that market? How do we do branding, marketing? One of the biggest problems in the last 10 years, when moringa was originally introduced into Eastern Africa as a very viable plant, the governments were encouraging farmers to grow moringa extensively. There was a lack of sophistication and interlinkage, if you will, in how do we brand it, how do we market it, how do we involve the business community, how do we ethically engage farmers. All those pieces were missing. And so what we've done here is we've engaged business leaders, um, particularly at the local level. We also have very strong international connections. But first and foremost, we're using our indigenous connections. And so there are very, very bright, talented, creative business leaders in sub-Saharan Africa. We're engaging the farmers, understanding what are their, needs. How do we make it so that this becomes a sustainable, ongoing, attractive business opportunity for them and their communities and their families? But we've also very, very strategically engaged the scientific community. So we've involved scientists and doctors at the governmental level, scientists and doctors within respected hospitals and research institutions. And we've even involved local doctors, if you will, even in the village level, so that we can understand how do we take these indigenous solutions like moringa and introduce them into the establishment, if you will, in a way that has credibility, quality, control, and all the things that you would expect any successful business to be able to have. Harry Foster once wrote a book. He wrote many books. He actually wrote over 400 publications in his life, and one of those was a book called What Really Causes AIDS, which I believe he wrote in 1999. He dedicated the book, at the beginning of the book it says, dedicated to Foinhaven 441. And most people in the world never had the opportunity to sit down with him and ask, well, what is Foinhaven 441? And it's a great story, and it really describes a lot of what we're doing here. In 1967, there was a famous horse race called the English Grand Nationals. And it was a brutal horse race where horses had to run around a track several times, jumping over brick walls and water traps and so forth. And there was a horse in the race named Foinhaven. And at the start of the race, it was 444 to 1 odds of winning. It was one of the largest, in fact, not the largest spread in horse racing history. The horse was so terrible that the owner and the trainer never came to the race. The jockey was out of shape and overweight, couldn't ride the horse, and so they asked 4 riders before the race if they would, and one of them chose to agree to ride the horse. On the last lap of the race, Foinhaven was a quarter mile back of the last horse, and the lead horse in the race crashed into the second last fence, and there was a major pile up. And Foinhaven, a quarter mile back, eventually walked through the carnage, flopped over the fence, and finished the race in the slowest time in history. And it's a great story, and in fact, you can watch it on YouTube. And I asked Harry once, well, that's a great story, Harry, but what has that got to do with your research on HIV and AIDS? And he goes, well, Brian, I'm Foinhaven. And I asked him, okay, so what does that mean? And he goes, well, I knew back in the 1980s when AIDS was originally discovered and the drug companies came out of the gate with their antiretrovirals and drugs and patents and so forth, I knew eventually that their theories on what supposedly causes AIDS would fail and crash, and that his theory on what really causes AIDS would be proven true and that he would win the race.